My name is Laura Schwab. I am on the Board of Trustees of ANJEC, retired from New Jersey Conservation Foundation. And I am glad to see you all after 3 years of not being in person. You know, is everybody enjoying the Congress so far? Well, it hasn't just started if you've gone to some of the virtual things, but it's nice to be in person now, right? And I just, we'd like to hear from you, so if you see any other board members or staff, please let us know how you're enjoying it and or what you would like to see, more topics and everything. One of the things that ANJEC asks its Board of Trustee members is to go out and meet with environmental commissions, and so I've been doing that. One of the things that keep coming up, questions that environmental commissions need help with, is how to deal with climate impacts at their local level. What can we do? And concrete examples. And I think your panel here today will be able to give that to you. So I think that's great. So how many of you are on an environmental commission? Okay. And any other committees at the local level government?
We have a green team.
Oh, okay, or green team. Okay.
I accidentally ran for state assembly last year.
Oh, okay.
Accidentally?
Accidentally?
Well, I live in LD10, and if you know the district there, it wasn't very close.
Oh. Well, so that's what we're going to talk about, is the climate change. Thank you for sharing, where you're from. The first speaker is Michael Pizarro. He is the policy director of the Watershed Institute, and he'll talk about stormwater impacts and management solutions. Suzanne Atman is from New Jersey Future, and she's a community organizer and policy advocate, and she'll share the sewage-free streets initiative and how to mitigate flooding. So I'll be keeping time. We should have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So please keep your questions in hand, and so we can find out what everybody else is doing. Michael.
Cool. I left my notes over here. So great, thank you. I'm not sure I want to go after the commissioner, but I will try. So NJPAC, you've heard Jen and the commissioner talk a little bit about it. We started in January of 2020 with an executive order with the governor calling climate an existential crisis, that we have to do something. That very same day, Commissioner McCabe told her administration, or DEP, to take a look at a series of rules to update and to incorporate climate change and mitigation. From coastal zone, freshwater wetlands, the commissioner talked about the Flood Hazard Area Control Act rules, stormwater management rules, and air pollution. Just so everyone is clear, and I will make this clear again and again and again, DEP has done a pretty good job on these. And here's sort of a timeline. January, the rules were supposed to be proposed January of 2021, at least for the land use ones, the flood hazard, wetland, stormwater, and the regulations were supposed to be adopted. If no one has any clue, we're not even here yet. And then because we aren't here, and I kind of feel that I'm borrowing something Jen Coffey has said multiple times, I kind of feel like Charlie Brown in DEP's Lucy with the football, because these rules were supposed to be proposed in the summer of 2021, and then after the election of 2021, first quarter of 2022, second quarter of 2022, and as was just mentioned yesterday afternoon, well, let me step back. What DEP then said, I'm going to take this 1,000-page rule, which is what they were talking about, and sort of take a small little section of it, and we're going to adopt it as emergency rules. And we're going to do that in June of 2022. And those we're going to do a couple things which I'll talk about, but the emergency rules were super important because unlike every other rule, every other process, they take effect immediately and they apply to everything that is in process. That never happened. And late yesterday, DEP announced we're going to have some more stakeholdering next week on these emergency rules, that smaller subsection. And why they're so important? If you don't sort of know the basic hydrology of stuff, in natural condition, when rain hits the ground, snow hits the ground, most of it goes into the ground or is used by plants, very little of it runs off. And as we continue to develop, that number goes from half in the ground to almost none in the ground, which means more and more runs off. New Jersey is about 33% impervious cover, and that really sort of undercounts things. And some of our communities are much higher than that. And you saw this, I guess Jen and I should have coordinated. Rainfall has changed. We've all experienced that. Climate Central is a nonprofit group out of Princeton. And this number is probably a very conservative number. Extreme rain events, those heavy rain events, have increased by 55% in the Northeast. And the way we design stormwater management, we assume rain falls in sort of that bell curve from high school or middle school, depending on how good you were in math, and I wasn't, so I probably learned that in college. Gentle, ramping up, and then going back down. The way our extreme events are happening is, like in Ida, we're getting several inches in a very, very short period of time. And the way we design stormwater systems aren't appropriate. And as Jen mentioned, the rainfall has changed. So used to be about 44 inches. Now in the central parts of Jersey, it's 49 inches. And we design all of our regulatory, our stormwater systems and everything based upon these storms, the 2, 10, 100-year storm. So for Mercer County, we design our basins for the 100-year storm at 8 inches. Reality, as you heard, we're really getting 9.1 inches. So everything that's been built in the last 20 years has been undersized. Everything that is being approved today is undersized. Not to mention what is going to be happening. So DEP did 2 studies with Cornell University. One was what has happened over the last 20 years since we stopped counting rain, and what will happen. So projections, and this is just, as the commissioner mentioned, moderate emissions by 2100. You know, Mercer County, where we're at, is going to see a 36% increase in rainfall. You know, Somerset County, 48, you know, and this is moderate. This is if we actually start doing stuff. And as Commissioner mentioned, you know, we hope what we build today is going to be around. Something like 86% of the houses in New Jersey were built before 1980. So all of that is still here and we're using, not to mention the malls and the strip centers and the offices and everything else. In 1980s are very important because in 1983 is when we started doing stormwater management. So everything built before 1983-84 has no stormwater management. So all of that is dealing with rain that was never designed to handle, nor was it ever designed to handle. And since I'm a watershed organization, and I sort of, and we're rapidly approaching the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, which said that, the Clean Water Act said that we should be seeing all green here. We're not, obviously. So this is a report that DEP puts out every 2 years, the Integrated Water Quality Assessment Report, and this monitors the health of our waterways. So again, Clean Water Act said by 1985 we're going to stop discharging pollutants in our waterway, and by 1983 restore our waters. Of the waters New Jersey monitors, most are not healthy enough for the aquatic life that lives there. I mean, that is just, in my mind, a horrifying statistic. And I could have pulled out the 2016, the 2014, the 2010, and it's not getting better. It's at best staying sort of stable or getting worse. So we have a lot of problems. NJ Pact is going to solve some of them. Municipalities can do a lot in the meantime and otherwise. Very quickly, the NJ Pact, and I don't know, is going to do a couple things. So for the coastal, and I'm not a coastal person, we have, obviously current sea level rise, future sea level rise. So that boardwalk, which is nice to go in the summer and watch the beach and the ocean, will now be in the ocean in the future. Which means our current floodplain, so this house is outside that floodplain right now, will be more in the floodplain by 2100. So NJ Pact will have a series of rules about what you can put here in the future, what notifications and deed restrictions have to be there, so that people understand you are in a floodplain, you are in the inundation zone, so that you have a risk of flooding. So everyone knows what they're buying. I'm an inland guy, so this is where I know the most. Again, as the commissioner mentioned, our floodplains are sort of out of date. Right now, this is the floodplain. You have your stream, and then you have the floodplain. The red house is in the floodplain currently. Yellow and blue house, not so much. The reality, and what Ida brought very, very clearly to us, is this is the new floodplain. So that blue house, which didn't think it was in the floodplain, is. That red house, which was, is even more. And that yellow house, it's knocking on the doorstep. And so what the NJ Pact rules will say is, we're going to take our existing floodplain, the FEMA 100-year flood zone, and add 3 feet. So that we know, and our rules will encourage you not to build in that floodplain, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put people in harm's way. It doesn't make sense to put roads that are going to wash out. I have 30 towns in my watershed. Every single one of those towns had roads or bridges destroyed by Ida. People trapped. Hopewell Township had to have 3 officers rescued because they got swept away. People stuck in their homes.
That's a question.
Sure.
Oh, great. What if the fact that we're so built out already, so that sounds like a good rule if you're not built out. But since we're so built out, do you know anything about how NJ Pact might address floodplain?
There's not a lot that I understand in NJ Pact which will help the existing built. It will stop this from getting, or help minimize this from getting worse. Because obviously, if this is the floodplain and we're building there, we're taking flood storage away. So we're taking volume that could be used and we're pushing it somewhere else. So somewhere downstream is going to flood out. So NJ Pact will help slow that down and minimize it. I will talk about some things municipalities can do to help get at the existing storm utilities is one of them. So as the commissioner said, developers do it wrong. As Julia Summer says, they do it intentionally. They go to the township to get their approvals, and they go to DEP. A, that's intentional. B, I think they even do it even worse. They try to get away with stuff. I'm not willing to say developers are evil. but they do try to maximize their profit because that's what corporations do. Our stormwater rules have a couple aspects to them. Let's see if I was able to do color. Oops. And they're, nope, sorry. So they're supposed to reduce flood damage, not prevent it, but reduce it. They're supposed to reduce soil erosion, which is good. Maintain integrity of stream channels. We failed. Maintain groundwater recharge. We kind of failed that. And prevent an increase in non-point pollution. We've also completely failed at that. Because the rules are slowing the rate by which things are getting worse, but they're not stopping it or reversing it. You remember, 86% of New Jersey was built before the rules. Only large developments are addressed. So if you're not disturbing an acre of soil, so a lot of our built out older municipalities, they don't have acres of land to be built. They have, at most, little small lots interspersed, or they're doing redevelopment, knocking down buildings and putting new buildings in. It's not addressing that pre-existing sins of the past before we knew they were sins of the past. Again, using outdated stuff, so we're designing for the past, not the present. Nutrients, so we have all heard probably the HABs, the harmful algal blooms that have plagued New Jersey over the last couple of years. There was an 8-mile one in the Millstone River this year that threatened water supply. And we don't deal with the volume. We deal with the rate. So there are solutions, and let me step back. When I say they deal with volume, have you heard of the quantity, quality, and recharge requirements of the stormwater rules? So you're supposed to reduce the increase in total suspended solids. You're supposed to sort of deal with recharge, and you deal with quantity. I hate that term. It is not quantity. There's like 4 different ways to calculate your quantity reductions. Only one of them are actually a quantity reduction, and no one ever has ever done that. I have attended hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. That's probably not an exaggeration of planning boards. And not a single one have taken that. Every time I bring it up, they say that's too hard and not appropriate. It is a rate reduction. We are slowing down how fast the water is running off, but we are increasing the volume. So every development ever built, even if it's done 100% right, is going to increase flooding because we're not dealing with volume and we're dealing with the past. So solutions. What municipalities can do. Whether NJ Pact is adopted today, tomorrow, 3 years from now, or when my children take over for me, we can get at those smaller lots. Municipalities are allowed to go stronger under the stormwater rules. They don't have to do an acre. They could do a half acre. They could do a quarter of an acre. A lot of towns have. They can address redevelopment so that the sins of the past. When properties are knocked down, if it was built in the 1980s, 1970s, 1950s, it has no stormwater management. The way the rules are currently sort of structured, if it didn't have it before, it really won't have it after. Because you only do quality treatment if you increase impervious cover by a quarter of an acre. A lot of our redevelopment sites are actually reducing, not a lot, but a little bit. And you only have to match the rate runoffs from what was pre-existing. So if it was sprinting off your site beforehand, it's going to sprint off after. So towns can do that. Cranberry has. Princeton has been talking about it forever. They promise they will do it. You can use existing natural resources of the site, the trees, the wetlands, the topography, as part of your stormwater management. Trees are in a tremendous stormwater management system. They suck up a ton of stormwater, they filter out and they slow it down. And they reduce the temperature that runs off. Temperature is a pollutant. The way our rules run, we only treat quality for those surfaces that are traveled by motor vehicles. So your roofs, your sidewalks, your patios are not necessarily treated for quality, but they carry pollutants. So why not treat it? Nutrients, we don't really deal with nutrients. It's to the maximum extent practicable, and no one ever talks about it. We can address volume. We can actually reduce the volume that comes off our site versus just the rate in regional approaches. So, hang on. So some of the, oops. So the NJ Pact rules will deal with redevelopment. The NJ Pact rules will sort of deal with the volume in that it will require on-site retention of the water quality design storm, which is about 1.25 inches. So you're not getting completely at a volume control standard, but you're getting slightly. And then regional approaches, as the commissioner mentioned, for stormwater utilities, if we do it municipality by municipality, I think we've done something very wrong. All right.
So does that mean that it's not going to deal with it, or it will deal with regional approaches?
Okay. Regional approaches are not in NJ PAC, but there's something else that will help us get there. And I hope I'm doing good on time.
You have 10 minutes.
Oh, good. So regional approaches are part of the stormwater rules. There's a whole chapter of it in there. No one has done it. There's been 2 attempts to do it in the past because, as the commissioner, as we all know, water doesn't respect municipal boundaries. Flooding doesn't respect them. So why should we plan from a municipal boundary perspective? And there's a bunch of stuff in there that the regional plans are supposed to have. I'm in the process of working with Somerset County on trying to maybe look at that. And I'm working with a bunch of Stony Brook towns on that approach.
And regional plans can contemplate either county or watershed?
You can do them on a watershed basis, you can do them on a county basis, and there's a couple benefits from them. So from a regional plan approach, so for the Stony Brook towns, I have now 5 of the 7 towns talking. They could say, and this is not the Stony Brook, that my volume issue is down here. So if I control volume better up here, I don't have a flooding problem down here. Here is where I have a phosphorus problem. So I can have a better phosphorus control up here versus down here where I don't necessarily need it. And if I'm trying to think of solutions, if I can start thinking about what can I build, what can I revegetate, what stream corridors can I go in and put better vegetation in, where can I sort of allocate my open space money to buy open space. Maybe it's up here versus the densely populated Princetons or Trentons or Hamiltons. Maybe I can purchase open space up here along stream corridors to reduce the volume, and my flooding is better down here. It will be cheaper than building a bunch of basins and tunnels and other structures, by and large. DC and Philadelphia have experienced that. So doing a regional stormwater plan provides a lot of flexibility. It's a lot of work and gives up some control to the municipalities because then they all have to adopt the same ordinances. But I think we are on the cusp of moving this way. Here's a bunch of towns that have done stronger stormwater ordinances. The Watershed Institute wrote an enhanced stormwater management ordinance that has a lot of these improvements that either NJ Pact was going to do or we thought NJ Pact should have, and maybe it doesn't, from an on-site retention standard, a redevelopment standard, reducing the thresholds, of development, creating a minor development standard. So as people add on to their buildings, their houses, their office buildings, you know, they're starting to be part of the solution versus just being part of the problem. So there are, and this is just a small sample, there's probably about 30 or 40 towns that have done some level of enhancement to their stormwater ordinance. It's allowed. This is, if you've reviewed development applications, if you've been on a planning board, you've heard of residential site improvement standards. Here's my advocacy plug. We need to kill it because it says all the towns that have done enhanced stormwater management ordinances that want to do better, want to control the runoff, wants to control the flooding in their town, they could do it for their offices, their warehouses, their schools, their malls. They can't do it for residential development. In some towns, that's all they have, residential development. Residential site improvement standard says the state is the maximum and the floor and you can't do better. I think that's illegal. I think that is against the Clean Water Act, and I've been working really, really hard to stop that. It's not new, it's been around, but I think we need to stop that, because how are we going to control flooding? How are we going to control stormwater pollution if we can't get at what the development patterns are in our town, or that we say only part of our town can get better stormwater management?
Mike, can I assume that there's a powerful lobby on the other side who's pushing to keep this?
Well, they won in 1993.
Who is they?
The developers.
Oh, so it's the developer?
Yeah, because each town was having their own standard. And it kind of makes sense. I don't need a 20-foot road in Montgomery and a 24-foot road in Princeton, and you know, Lawrence has a 30-foot road, or 6-inch curb heights and 8-inch curb heights. You know, that makes it a little difficult. But from a stormwater management perspective, if each town has different flooding issues, why are we forcing them all to have one standard? There's an article about it. TMDLs and MS4s. So the Municipal Separate Storm Source System, or MS4 permit, is coming out. Again, it gets renewed every 5 years. And I think this is what is going to force regional approaches. I think this is what's going to encourage towns to do stormwater utilities on a regional basis, because of the watershed improvement plans. If you remember, I showed a chart of water quality in New Jersey as not being so hot. And these are all of the total maximum daily loads prepared by DEP, which are plans to reverse that, to get our waters to meet standards, except for we don't really implement them. The watershed improvement plans, which will start to be rolled out on January 1st, hopefully. Let me go back. I cannot do this on the side.
You're doing great.
Says to municipalities, and I did a whole webinar on this in April, watershed improvement plans. I'm going to take an inventory of everything I own from a stormwater perspective, all of the basins, all of the pipes, all of the inlets. You should have been mapping your outlets since 2004. How are these all interconnected? What is being discharged where? And then I'm going to, in years 4 and 5, come up with a plan to reverse the water quality issues. I'm going to, as a municipality, figure out what projects I need to build, what things I need to do so that we reach water quality standards. And I truly believe we're not going to be able to reach water quality standards without also addressing flooding. Because part of the reason we have a water quality problem is we have so much water coming off our sites that are eating our streams apart. So some of that sediment and all that cloudiness in our streams is because that's the stream, that's the riverbanks being eaten away. Some of it's just the pollution running off our land. So I have to come up with this plan. And if we come up with 565 plans, and we do 565 different sets of projects in each town, or 565 projects that have multiple things in each town, we have done it the least efficient, the most expensive way possible. And so, as I said, you do all this inventory and you come up with a plan, what projects, what best management practices. And some of those best management practices are, in my mind, better stormwater management, tree protection. A lot of towns have a tree protection ordinance already in place. The MS4 permit is going to require all towns to have one in place because we know, again, trees suck up stormwater. They infiltrate, and if we allow everyone to build right up against the stream, we're putting them A, in harm's way, and B, we're preventing the stream from protecting itself. So stream corridor ordinances. You know, New Jersey has, as the riparian zones, 50, 150, and 300 feet. Well, maybe that should be 150 feet on all of our streams. Maybe it should be 300. The science says the wider and more intact the buffer is, the less pollution, the less flooding that stream has. So here's some things municipalities can do. They have the power to do stream corridor ordinance. A lot of them have it. You know, some have tree protections. And as I said, there's probably 2, 3, 4 dozen towns that have done better stormwater management. So these are powers that you all have that can do. As I said, we have an enhanced stormwater management ordinance. I know New Jersey Future has one as well. Sustainable Jersey has basically referenced our 2 ordinances and saying you can get points if you do one of those. So I think that's it.
Thank you. Let's hold questions till after Suzanne's, and then we'll get all your questions answered.
All right, I'm just gonna switch them.
Oh, you're being all fancy.
It's because mine's Google Slides. I wasn't able to make a PDF.
You want me to move this one?
If you're in the mood. Now you can hear all my emails coming in. Okay. Okay. Let me just get this on. Sorry, everyone. I never use these. Oh, yes, I see. Okay. Hi. So my name is Suzanne Attman. I'm with New Jersey Future, and I'm going to talk about, I think it's interesting we're talking about water and flooding, because when we think of climate crisis, there's also drought, right? There's also heat. But in New Jersey, and so many of our towns, this tends to be the biggest crisis. But I'm going to take a bit of a different slant and speak specifically about combined sewer overflows and the issues around flooding as it relates to sewage in streets and rivers. Let me just ask, does anybody know, is anybody here from a combined sewer system community? There's 21 in New Jersey. And you might discover that you are as we go through this. But even if you're not, you know, it's important to know what's happening to our neighbors. There's environmental justice issues around it, and you know, there's ways that you can advocate, become part of the solution as a resident of New Jersey who cares about other communities. So New Jersey Future, if you don't know who we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and our focus is helping towns in New Jersey to develop smart growth strategies through research, policy, advocacy, and local assistance. A lot of the work we do is around water, and some of my colleagues are actually here talking about different issues related to water. Within our organization, we have a campaign and a coalition called sewage-free streets and rivers, and this campaign brings together grassroots organizations, residents of environmental justice communities with combined sewer systems, and for several years we've been advocating with the DEP to bring more planning and equity to communities who do have these sewer systems. So for those of you who don't know, what is a combined sewer overflow? So there's combined sewer systems and then there's the overflow. So the MS4 permit that Mike was talking about, many towns have two systems, right? You have a system where your stormwater runoff goes to typically two water bodies, and then you have a pipe that takes your wastewater to the treatment plant to be treated, right? So you have two systems, two piping systems. In a combined sewer system, as you can imagine, the rainwater and the sewer, right, wastewater, all is combined and flows through one piping system to the treatment plant to be treated, right? And this is historically, these had a good intention, like in the 1800s and 1900s. It was a way for these cities to avoid disease or to minimize disease. Because they needed a way to have there were many slaughterhouses in towns in those days, and I won't get into the gory details, but as you can imagine, this was a way for all of that waste to leave and not turn into disease or create disease. But now, right, as Mike said, these systems are not fitted properly, right? They're too small, and because of the intensity of rains and stormwater, so treatment plants are unable to handle flows that are more than twice the design capacity. And when this occurs, a mix of stormwater and untreated sewage discharges directly into the waterways, right, as well as causing backups into basements and streets. And so we've seen that happen in several of our communities. Newark, in fact, during a few of the big storms, what happened was the waste treatment plant lost power, which happens. It's another issue we have to deal with in terms of the climate crisis. And so the sewage backed up into the streets. So we'll talk more about that. And where are these CSOs? So there's 21 municipalities that have combined sewer systems. You can see them here. They tend to be more toward northern New Jersey and the more built out areas. So I think everyone is on there. Not everyone, but Camden, Gloucester. So yeah, so there's 21. Good. Thank you, Mike. So this is just an interesting statistic. The amount of sewage overflow during Hurricane Sandy was 11 billion gallons, which was equivalent to the entire area of Central Park, 843 acres, 1.4 square miles, stacked 41 feet high with sewage, or more than 50 times the BP oil spill. If you look at the news, Hurricane Ida, when it hit Florida, I don't know the exact number, I don't know if you do, how many gallons, but one of the big outcomes of that in Florida was billions of gallons of sewage as a result of that. So even today. CSOs discharge upwards of 23 billion gallons of this toxic brew annually into rivers and bays. So you can see, if you didn't know about this issue before, you can see why we're highlighting it today. Thanks, Mike. So how will climate change impact combined sewer systems, and how will combined sewer systems impact climate change? That should be a question mark. And Mike addressed some of this already. So, oh, did you have a question? Yes. Yes, go.
No.
Oh, okay. We're like co-facilitating. The effects of climate change on CSOs, I think I kind of alluded to this: increased flooding, which then overwhelms a system, sea level rise, so water backs up, right? So if sea level rise is higher than the outflow, right, mechanism, then the water backs up. More power outages with severe storms, wastewater treatment plants rely on electric power. This is, just go back a second, I'll just show you. This is Patterson, which is one of our hub communities that we work with on sewage-free, but also on lead issues. And this is one of our members took this picture after a big storm. Thank you. So how does CSOs impact climate change? One way is every time it rains a lot and human pollutants are carried by the excess stormwater into surrounding waterways, wetlands lose their ability to contain the carbon, allowing more greenhouse gases to enter the atmosphere. So that's one way that CSOs impact. And so just, in sum, the impacts are on our neighborhoods, flooding, impaired water quality, contamination, on our economy that can hurt businesses, impede transportation, on our health, foul waterways, polluted flooding, and on our future, not able to handle increased rainfall in a changing climate. Thanks, Mike. Just a couple of other dilemmas. The amount of sewage released is not currently tracked, right? So that's something that we advocate for, so we understand what's really happening. Outdated rainfall data, as Mike mentioned, is used when planning these upgrades. So the upgrades that they are planning, and there's a process in place, just as there are with MS4s, to upgrade, it's using outdated rainfall data. So these projects right now are being planned to support storms from, 50 years ago?
22 years ago.
22 years ago, right? Not looking into what's happening now into the future, which, as you can imagine, then what happens? Well, I don't know, let me ask you, what happens then? What's the problem with that?
Starts all over.
It starts all over again, right? You invest all this money and this time and nothing happens, and so another problem is right here is that many of these issues are happening in environmental justice communities, who are at least able to afford it, the cost of upgrading. So you can imagine how that plays out. And then this is also, and I'm discovering this in the community work I'm doing, a lot of these communities have renters, so they're more transitory, the people that live there. So they don't own their properties, they can't flood-proof themselves, right? They need to get permission from their landlords. And there's limited awareness. Because people are coming and going, people aren't even aware necessarily that they live in a CSO community and that when it floods, there's sewage involved. So in Patterson, they've had to close the schools for like a month or two at a time because of the sewage problems after rains. Thank you. So what can we do about it? Just at a very high level, and most of this is, much of this is what Mike already suggested. We have to adapt to increased high tide at the sewage discharge points, and there's different ways we can do that. Mitigate increased flows in the sewers, so tide gates, dams, valves to mitigate the backflow, that ties into point 1. Raising the sewer outflows. If you're an engineer in the room, this will be more interesting for you. Sewer separation. Right? I bet some of you are saying, well, why don't you just separate the sewer systems? Well, why don't we? What do you think?
Money.
Yeah. Yes, I like that. Right, so there are towns, though, that are starting to do some of that. And then, of course, green infrastructure, you're hearing a lot about that, especially in our ANJAC community. Storage facilities, so some are building storage facilities, for example, under a park that will store the water temporarily and then move it on after things clean up. Renewable energy to lessen power outages. So you want to make sure that these waste treatment plants are operational, right? However, I'll give you an example. In Newark, the Passaic Valley Water Commission is the water treatment organization there. They're trying to solve this problem, and so their suggestion is to build a wall around the treatment plant, and they're building a supplemental power station. And you might have heard as environmentalists that they are proposing to use natural gas for that new power station to power the wastewater treatment plant. And the environmental community, many organizations are coming out advocating for this to be built using renewable energy, right? Because Newark already has many natural gas powered facilities there, and it becomes an environmental justice issue, as well as a carbon emission issue. And then again, we need to advocate for more current rainfall projections for models. You all are doing that, I assume. Yeah, good. Okay, so we don't have to worry about it. It'll happen. Okay. So this is really technical. I don't know how technical you're going to get. I find it fascinating now because I'm so into it. But basically, the way it worked is that under the Clean Water Act, water pollution regulations have been implemented, and point sources of pollution have been required to have a permit. How many of you knew that or know that? Okay, great.
But I have my master's in social policy with the focus on environmental parks. So I feel like I'm a niche.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Reason I know that.
So please add to any of this. You probably know a ton more. But I thought that was interesting because I didn't realize the connection when I first learned about this. So the DP issued permits in 2015 to municipalities who have these combined sewer systems. And it required that these communities develop long-term control plans. So that's great, right? To deal with it. And they should develop schedules for eliminating the discharge. Those were submitted by these municipalities, these 21 municipalities, in 2020. One issue with it is that the horizon for when they have to implement their plan is like 20 to 40 years from now. So one thing that we're advocating for is that these CSO communities be prioritized, right, in the DEP's world, in the funding world, right, so that that work can accelerate. There was a public stakeholder process, so that's one way you can get involved, is in the public stakeholder process. Even if you don't live in that community, right, as advocates, as environmentalists, it's important for more voices to be part of this process. So the DP has asked for revisions to these plans, and so we're waiting, as Mike is waiting, we're waiting for these forthcoming permits to be released that will state, so basically the DP has to approve the plans. And when they approve it, towns can get started on making these changes. However, we've been waiting for these permits, and we're told that the first one's going to come out this fall. And one thing we're advocating for is to accelerate the release of these permits, and again, to prioritize communities that are in these environmental justice areas. So there you go. And so one mechanism we have to move this along is the permitting and long-term control plan process. Also, as municipalities, you can look into zoning changes that require green infrastructure, ordinances, as Mike mentioned, funding, and then lobbying and advocating for faster permit release and strengthened permits. Just curious, after you saw the map, did anybody change their mind on whether they live in a CSO community? No? Okay. You all have separate. You can sleep a little bit better at night. Not much better. So what is sewage-free streets and rivers? What are our recommendations for the permits that are about to be released? Because that's the kind of the next step in terms of advocacy. We would like the state to adopt an official sea level rise standard. There isn't a standard across the board to guide planning for combined sewer overflow plans and projects. Adopt, as we said several times, a future model for project design to account for the future impacts of climate change, right? Not what's happening now. We'd like them to require that CSO permit holders, who are the municipalities themselves, to use the DEP's new adopted standard, revised official design storm standard, and model year for designing, planning, and evaluation CSO projects, so we don't run into that problem down the road where you did all this work and it was for naught. Require that utility permit holders, right, so that would be like Passaic Valley Sewage Commission, to incorporate energy efficiencies and projects that will get them to reach zero emissions from their treatment plants, so that ties into the bigger climate change picture. Significant capital improvements will be required, and stakeholders should advocate for more state and federal funding for such improvements, and ensure that there's equity around that. Okay. I just thought this was a really interesting case study. I was trying to find good ones here in New Jersey, but there aren't many. But in South Bend, Indiana, and this might have been under Buttigieg's time, So 1 to 2 billion gallons of polluted water was dumped into the St. Joseph River there annually. And so instead of gray infrastructure, which is what a lot of communities are, they're trying to fix the problem through gray infrastructure, they installed a real-time monitoring technology of more than 120 sensors that were located throughout the city's urban watershed. So they're looking into high technology to help them make decisions in real time around their sensors, their different ways that they can basically avoid flooding by knowing what's happening in their sewer system at any given time, in real time. And so since 2012, they've eliminated dry weather overflows, right, which are different from combined sewer overflows, and reduced CSOs in the river by more than 70%. So wouldn't that be interesting if New Jersey also started to look at what's possible in that way across our systems? Norfolk, Virginia, they passed changes to their flood and coastal zone ordinance following increases in severe coastal flooding and anticipation of sea level rise. And so they have ordinances that are addressing this. I don't know how ours compared to that.
That's exactly what the NJPAC rules would say. You take the FEMA 100-year floodplain, add 3 feet to it. So
great.
Exactly.
And if you would like to get involved, would like more information, we have a website, sewagefreenewjersey.org, Twitter, Facebook, lots of interesting stuff. Feel free to reach out to me if you'd like more information or want to have a conversation. And that's about it. Any questions?
Any questions for either Mike or Suzanne? Yes.
Thank you. Excellent presentations. I live in Eatontown and we did a redevelopment for our stormwater ordinance, but I haven't seen I haven't seen any change in the site plans. And we have a lot of redevelopment in Eatontown. They're like, we're gonna take this, we're gonna knock it over, we're gonna make it an Amazon Fresh, and they don't change it so much. And I feel like they're trying to not call themselves redevelopment. So I just wanted to get an idea from you. What exactly constitutes redevelopment? A little tweaking, or they have to bulldoze the whole property and then redevelop it from scratch
So
for the stormwaters to kick in?
So what you're experiencing is they're not taking down the structure.
Yes, they're not.
Yeah.
So they're not. It's not really redevelopment. I'm like, I think it is because they got a lot of variances, like you said in the beginning. They,
Yeah. So I mean, if the applicant is getting variances, that is a power that the zoning board has to really get better work. Because
so to clarify, they had pre-existing variances granted. So they're already granted, so keep those.
Yeah.
Let's keep it.
So most of the redevelopment ordinances I have seen is if we raise the building, we completely clear the site. As an advocate, I'd like to see if I've done anything with the building, but that's probably not practicable, is again, you take down the site, you've disturbed whatever that new threshold is it an acre, is it a half acre of soil? You then treat that site as if there was nothing ever there. So you do the quantity, you actually really do a quantity standard, you reduce the total suspended solids running off, and you do recharge. What towns can do to get at that sort of, I have tweaked the building, unfortunately is going to be regional planning, the watershed improvement plans, and stormwater utilities. Because, when a developer comes in to take down a site, doing stormwater management doesn't really add a whole lot. I mean, it does add some to the cost, but really doesn't add a tremendous amount to the cost of a project. If all they're doing is some interior, retrofits, maybe tweaking the parking lot a bit, bringing stormwater management, while the right thing to do, probably does add a bit of cost. So a stormwater utility, and Jay Future and others are doing a lot on this. We've done a couple conferences as well. You pay for your impervious cover. So you've created incentives for project developers to reduce their impervious cover so they're paying less. You're giving funds to the municipality to actually implement projects. Could either be projects that they're doing themselves or grants to private property owners to install green infrastructure, to do other things to reduce the project. So I'm not sure I quite got at your answer.
Yeah, we have like, if you're familiar with the Monmouth Mall,
Mm-hmm.
they want to put 1,000 apartments, and so they're really not changing the paved area, but it's all paved. So for them to
So-
change it, I would just love for them to put more
They
rain
would-
gardens in, or even one.
They would likely be ripping out the parking lot and regrading the site, which would be soil disturbance. They're probably not building on the parking lot. They're ripping it out. So they're doing the soil disturbance, which would trigger the stormwater rules if it's over an acre. The problem with the way the rules currently work is if it's not a new quarter acre of motor vehicle traveled surfaces or regulated motor vehicle surfaces, I don't have to do quality. So most redevelopment sites are shrinking the impervious cover by a little bit. But no. All I have to do is either reduce the peak rates or match the peak rates from what is pre-existing. So if all I have is pavement that had no stormwater management, all I have to do is match that rate, which is as fast as possible. So a redevelopment standard would say you would treat that site, and Princeton is looking at doing this. I'm treating that site as a forest in good condition, which is the slowest rate you could possibly get. So we're going to look at that as the baseline and then make you, the redeveloper, meet that. And then doing recharge. If you had no recharge beforehand, you don't have it afterwards again. And so the NJ Pact rules will do a little bit of that. You know, we're encouraging towns to do the whole suite.
Is there any way for the insurance companies to put pressure on the corporations to do the economically right thing?
They are. And I'm just starting to learn more and more about it. I've kind of sort of fringes. So mortgage companies aren't lending in places that are flooding, or they're charging much higher rates.
That's not true with the Jersey Shore. That's simply untrue.
Well, a lot of those are second homes, so it's kind of
Not in Brick Township.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to bore everybody with the battle that we're doing there right now, but the sooner they can get the chainsaw on those trees, the happier those developers are. And I'm not sure.
it's starting to happen. We're not there yet. I mean, Florida is experiencing a lot more than we are, but I've been hearing that,
Florida's issue specific to their roof crisis.
well, no, there's a whole host of issues there, but so mortgage companies are starting to, insurance companies are starting to adjust their rates significantly, and if not insuring places. Investors are not investing money in places that are experiencing flooding. So either they're not providing money into mortgage companies or otherwise. It's nascent.
Don't tell that to D.R. Horton, because they're coming to chop down 35 acres and build 65 homes. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's nascent,
And when you have these big companies, they'll do anything they can to bend the rules.
yeah, they figure out what they can get away with. And there's a whole slew of things planning boards, zoning boards, and environmental commissions can do to stop and slow that process down. One of the biggest things I've started to see is, when you do stormwater management that relies on infiltration, you're supposed to do soil test pits. And you're supposed to do them where the basins are supposed to be. Many plans don't either have any of those test pits, or those test pits aren't anywhere near where the basins are. So frankly, that application should never have been deemed complete. The clocks should never have started ticking. The township engineer or the planning board engineer should be saying, go back, give this to me. And give this to me in a way I know you did it right. So you see a lot of the soil pits, but then you never see a map. Or you see a map, and that map doesn't have the overlay of where the stormwater basins are. So I'm sitting there going, I'm trying to overlay 2 maps and look over the light to see, is this done right? So.
Why is that happening, Mike? Why aren't the planning boards putting their foot down? Do they just not know?
It's about ratables and stuff like that. That's part of it, I think.
It's a combination of a ton of things. One, planning board members are volunteers.
Right.
So they don't get the training. The townships have a pressure for ratables. The township engineers, are seeing tons and tons and tons of plans. In a lot of cases, they are consultants. So they are working for 5 or 6 towns, plus they have 10 or 15 developers that they represent. And so they don't have the time, the energy, or even the training to do some of this. Or they're picking up like the really, really big things. Like there was a project in a town that I'm not going to mention where the developer and his engineer stood up and swore to the planning board this met the green infrastructure rules. Swore up and down it met the rules. It had concrete low flow channels. So those, literally the concrete in the bottom of the basin that doesn't allow any water to infiltrate. There was no green infrastructure. No, there was. But that was treating the roof, not the parking lots. It didn't even come close to meeting it. So the planning board engineer spent so much time getting him to do the big things that some of these sort of more nuanced things skip. You can't get to it, or you didn't notice it.
Saying about it, they play the game.
Yep. Yeah. The commissioner said it should come to DEP first. They missed quite a bit as well. And 2, DEP, the land use, what formerly was called land use, will say, we see probably less than 50% of the applications that go through a land use board. Because unless it impacts the coastal zone, waterfront development, wetlands, or the flood hazard area, it doesn't come to DEP. There may have been a regulation I missed, but unless you're building in a wetland or building in the stream buffer or on the coastal zone.
LUQMPs. Water quality management plans.
Yeah, that's toothless. The DEP doesn't see them, So, we need, as environmental commission members, as planning board members, as the environmental community, to get better training. So we understand these issues, we can sort of pick out these problems. The designers, the engineers, have to be held accountable. So if I'm designing a system that meets the green infrastructure rule of stormwater, but yet has concrete low flow channels, that doesn't meet it. If I'm submitting plans that have no soil logs or infiltration testing, that doesn't meet the rules. That should be, I'm not even looking at this plan, go back. And in fact, I'm reporting you to the PE board. I'm saying something very controversial there. Because they have a code of ethics that says I'm not going to do, sort of like doctors, I'm doing no harm. But if I'm designing systems I know that are undersized and aren't controlling flooding, but yet I'm getting out there in front of the planning boards and saying, you won't flood your neighbors, or it meets the rules and it doesn't, that's just wrong.
Now, are those maps that you were talking about that show the test pits, or supposed to show the test pits and the area where it's supposed to be, is that part of the information that goes to the environmental commissions? Or
not necessarily.
I was wondering.
If your township, a lot of townships will have a checklist.
Right.
You need to have this amount of information. And if that, one of those requirements isn't a site plan with the test pit overlays, you're not going to get it. I mean, I've seen engineers have, their site plan, it's, whatever scale it is, and then the test pit map is at a completely different scale. So literally taking and trying to overlay the 2 maps when we used to do things in hard copy became hard.
Yeah. Is there some kind of a checklist an environmental commission can have that would, yes, ask for this, ask for that.
I am working on pulling something like that together.
Yeah.
I am trying to pull together some good municipal review engineers. Where are your sticking points? Why are you having problems?
We have one that we did ourselves, just because we see so many of these plans, but if there was something that you could provide us, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
And because we're, like you said, we're all volunteers and amateurs.
Yeah.
And while the town engineer is a professional in our town, it's because it's a big city by now, Brick Township, we, even, and all of my commission, all of us are there almost 10 years together. We still kind of don't know what we're doing in a way.
So,
And ANJAC has its own site plan review checklist that we can make available to, which it has, it's some of the things that you should be looking for, and if you don't get those plans, I mean, you can ask.
Yeah, I know that, I know that. But I was just wondering if it incorporated some of this, all of this stormwater management, the new stuff.
yeah, we need to update those things. You know, ANJAC does a lot of trainings. The Watershed Institute has been doing a series of trainings for professionals so they can sort of wrap their heads around this, but also the public. You know, I'm gonna speak for ANJAC, but I'm sure Jen would be willing, and the rest of the staff is willing to come talk to EC members. My organization is willing to do that. There's a bunch of watershed organizations throughout the state. We've done it by Zoom. I've talked in Millburn and Sparta and...
What do you talk about?
Stormwater management, stream corridors, tree protections. You know, the Highlands Coalition does a lot of great work in doing this stuff. There's a lot of resources out there, but...
Could I ask a different question? You and Sean both mentioned this stuff about, there's been 22 years since there's been a survey of the data about the rainfall. I mean, you can just Google the rainfall for the last 20 years and find what it was.
So what happens is the New Jersey DEP regulations reference the NOAA Atlas 14 Volume 2 Edition 3 or something like that. And that's like 106 years worth of data that they stopped collecting in 1999. So all of our regulations, all the municipal ordinances that reference the DEP rules and the DEP manual reference this atlas.
The data exists.
Yes. And in fact, one of my communities, we were talking, because they get flooded out of the drop of a hat sometimes, you know, because they built out before the 1980s. And they sort of, you know, built on a big parking garage on Spring Street. You know, how to do that. And then DEP announced the emergency rules and saying, I don't have to do it, they're doing it, and it's going to be effective immediately. Now I have to go back and figure out how to incorporate that into an ordinance.
And also a similar question about the floodplain. U.S. Department of Environmental Protection this year released the maps about sea level rise. You can you can put the year and it will show you when your house is going to be underwater. But New Jersey can't just adopt those?
Well, they can. And, you know, so like I said, they are adopting, I'm not as familiar with the coastal, but they're adopting sea level rise and calling it an inundation zone.
You better hurry because it won't be there much longer.
Yeah. And they're doing something inland again. It's either the FEMA 100-year floodplain plus 3 feet, because we know those floodplains are old, or it's if DEP's mapped the floodplain, so there are some streams DEP has already mapped, it's plus 2 feet, because DEP's already been a little more
So you have kind of adapted.
Yeah, so I mean, a municipality, you know, the way DEPs adopt regulations, they propose it, there's a comment period, and they have 1 year from a proposal to adopt it. So there's a year period of time that every developer in the known universe rushes their plans to get it to DEP so they get it under the old rules. DEP right now is under an avalanche of applications when they thought the emergency rule was going into effect. Municipalities can really do that process much quicker. They introduce an ordinance, they refer it to the planning board for master plan consistency, and they adopt it 60 days, 30 days. You know, they could update their stormwater management ordinance in a very short period of time, which is going to take DEP a year to do.
I think he had a question.
I've already asked a question.
This gentleman.
I wanted to ask a question. I used to live in Ewing, and I was the head of the Environmental Commission. and it was an advisory commission to the planning board. And we had a member on the planning board, and during my tenure, we had 2 certified landscape architects who were on the environmental commission and who were also on the site plans, and one of them was also the planning board member. And they had more than 50 years of experience between them. And regardless of the fact that they knew what they were talking about, and that the environmental commission knew what it was talking about, when it came to doing business with the planning board was a location where many political appointees went. And even though the environmental commission was right, practically all of the time, it didn't make a big deal of difference because the planning board was set in its ways.
Very true.
Yeah, and you would think it's the same way in our town too, actually. And you would think, because, I live less than a mile from Logan Bridge, and if you're familiar with what happened in Sandy, the water was deep in our neighborhood and all over Britain and Tom's River. And it's still, even with that anniversary coming up, it doesn't seem like it's had, okay, yeah, so any new house they build on the shore that's in the floodplain, they'll raise now. That's the rules now. But that's the only accommodation that they've made in the 10 years since that happened.
Yeah, it doesn't help the volume. So, that is difficult. I have seen that
The
time.
advisory versus a non-advisory.
Yeah,
I think really.
I think they're. I've heard a couple of people talk about trying to change that now.
On giving environment commissions more
authority, or, and I think another way, if we can't do that, and it's a lot harder, a lot longer, is to get better support from the environmental commission to be showing up at these planning board meetings. So if you've got 10 or 15 or 20 people in the public who know what they are talking about, saying the same thing, and if they are going to be elected officials and saying, you've got to fix this, or we will fix this in the next election. There was a representative from another watershed organization who was on their environmental commission that got disbanded because they were raising too much ruckus, trying to do the right thing. So that person said, okay. He ran for mayor and won. One of probably 1 out of a million. But the only way we're going to get it better is either, and we kind of failed because we have all these regulations that are skirted, and until it's get caught or someone files a lawsuit, it gets sort of brushed under the bridge, so to speak, until it gets flooded and everyone wonders what the hell happened. Until we get better education and we demand better, we're not going to get it. There's a town that passed an enhanced model ordinance, and I was at a development application where one whole section of it they just ignored. And I brought it up and they ignored the question. Now I have to go back and look to see how many development applications they had since they adopted this enhancement that they've ignored. And now I got to, you have to decide, do I sue? And that takes time and expense. But I'm going to do that and then bring that to the planning board and see what their explanation is, and then bring it to the council, and then bring it to the public.
It's the legal risk that upsets the apple cart.
See,
many
it does. But here's the thing. No town is scared of me suing them.
Well, no.
Or Julia, or maybe they're scared of, I don't know, Julia. They're scared of the developers suing them.
So deep pockets. Go up against that.
So, but
Did you want to have a question?
Well, I wanted to ask Suzanne something, but this is an important conversation. I can ask her after we run out of time.
It's up to you.
Are you guys okay changing the?
We all want to know what you want to say.
Better be good.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I was seeing and hearing correctly. You referenced the billions of gallons of
of sewage that was released during Sandy, about 5.1.
Yeah?
Then you say that 23 billion is released annually? Yeah.
I guess Sandy was over the course of 3 days, and that was over the course of 365
Yeah.
days.
Upwards of 23 billion annually. That's New Jersey. Or
Yep.
in our state. Wow. Okay.
No, this is national.
That's not, okay.
Yeah, this is New Jersey.
That helps explain it. Okay.
Yeah, 5.1.
Still not a good thing. Still not a good thing.
It's only 5.1 here.
But my other question is, you're talking about upgrades. Is that the municipality's responsibility? How is that?
Go ahead. Did you want to?
I was thinking about the cost. Someone was talking about one of the holdups is the cost. I worked on a project in Atlanta, and it was $1.4 billion combined sewer overflow project. Actually, it was one of the largest ones back in that time.
Oh.
And it was amazing how much this overflow from the sewage and through all the creeks within that city. It's a real circle, basically. The Atlanta sits in the middle of the highway, and so all this contamination in the water and flow. So actually, a lot of sewage does get in, but the expense for construction is amazing. So that's a big problem.
Yeah.
That's what Sean was talking about before too, about you spend them, you gotta like, the old thing on Wall Street, you gotta spend some money to make some money. It's like, I remember when Sandy happened, I read a story about the flood insurance program, and it talked about this one house on the Mississippi River that they had like, the flood insurance had rebuilt like 5 times, and they were finally like, you know what, maybe we should just lift it.
Yep.
And finally, FEMA got into the habit of doing that, but it took them, it focused on this one house. I'm sure there's hundreds of examples of that.
They should not lift it, they should buy it.
Well, they should tear. Well, yeah, that was right after Sandy. I think New Jersey is doing a good job of buying some of these properties up now. But to your point, though, it's about, what? You don't think having clean water is going to be a benefit to your community? Come on.
The other benefit of that project, actually, which took a number of years, was that the end result also allowed for more spaces for folks, parks, and greenway acquisition types of stuff. So once you make those changes, you have to do something with the space, and so the entire city has changed in that way. More tourists come in, etc. So that's the other part that we must put into the equation of that weighted $1 billion, and you can.
That's brilliant.
I have been lucky not to live in a community that has CSOs, but I was at a different talk several years ago, and someone from Canada was like, our kids are walking through sewage to get to school.
Yes.
That is as horrifying, if not more horrifying, than the fact that our waters aren't clean enough for fish. That's it. We're in the 21st century of a first world nation, and our kids have to walk through sewage.
I heard a story yesterday about this sewage water and how there was a home that had mold issues. Because of the sewage water had infiltrated the home, it eradicated the mold because there were so many chemicals in the sewage water. It killed the mold.
PFAS has an extra benefit.
So I want to thank the 2 speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm sure they're going to be here if you have any other questions. But